Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Anime Brain Freeze. We are your golden hosts.
I am John.
And I'm CC, and when there's just too much cool anime to watch, we got you covered. It's time to get sweaty, but not in real life, there's way too much of that right now. But in the anime boxing ring, because today I will review the bionic slugfest Megalobox. After that, John dives into his own personal Matrix hellscape, which of course has been unleashed by an idol, which couldn't be more fitting and appropriate.
Now, hold on.
No, you know it's true. Own up to it.
Yeah.
And last but not least, to successfully stand our ground in face of this continuing heatwave, we picked at least one show this week that is set in winter: the crazy gold hunting adventures of a soldier and an Ainu girl in Golden Kamuy. So, wring out your sweaty t-shirts, get yourself a cool drink. We'll be right back. Megalobox is about a young boxer named Junk Dog, who is trying to make a name for himself, but this is not your old school run-of-the-mill boxing we're talking about here. All boxers in this new sport called Megalobox are equipped with gear, mechanical exoskeletons that enhance their strength and reflexes. And Megalobox is popular in both pro sports as well as in the shady underbelly of the boxing world, where people can bet on fights. And the latter ones are obviously controlled by criminal organizations and rigged to favor a certain outcome and increase gains from the bets. And Junk Dog and his coach Nabu fight in these rigged fights to make ends meet. But Junk Dog is getting more and more frustrated with this way of living, and things are escalating quickly when one fateful evening he runs into Yukiko Shirato, the head of the Shirato group, who are basically the main developers of gear equipment and the company pushing the popularity of Megalobox. And accompanying Yukiko is Yuri, the world champion of that sport. And as these things go, naturally Junk Dog challenges Yuri to fight him in a ring. And surprisingly, Yuri appears before Junk Dog not much later in one of the underground boxing rings and beats the living shit out of him.
Oh.
You know, which you wouldn't necessarily expect, but that's what happens. But Yuri is impressed with Junk Dog's will and resilience and returns the challenge. If Junk Dog can make it through the upcoming official Megalonia tournament, Yuri is willing to fight him with the full extent of his power and abilities. So, Junk Dog enters Megalonia under a new name, Joe, and is willing to risk everything to fulfill his promise to Yuri and fight him one more time. So, yeah, the animation production of this show is done by TMS. We have mentioned them before in our review of Lupin Season 4, I think. Mm-hmm. They have at least produced a lot of Lupin stuff and animated some of it as well. And they also worked on The Gray Man, Yowamushi Paddle, which is also another favorite of mine. And back in the 80s and 90s, a lot of American cartoons, like, for example, Galaxy Rangers or Batman and Superman the Animated Series. Most of the best-looking episodes in those shows were done by them. And they also worked on the spiritual predecessor of this show, because this is kind of a semi-remake of an old series called Ashita no Joe, or Tomorrow's Joe. Which was first created as a manga in the late 60s. The manga was drawn by Tetsuya Chiba and written by Iki Kajiwara, or Asao Takamori, which is his pseudonym, which he used so he could write for different magazines during that time. He also created Tiger Mask, which we have briefly talked about before in a sneak peek of ours. And the manga then got turned into an anime in the early 70s, which got a sequel in the early 80s. That was also turned into a movie. And now we got Megalobox, which apparently has a manga version as well, but the TV show is not based on the manga. Instead, the manga is using the concept of the TV show and is, I don't know if it's really doing its own thing, but it's at least basically coming running at the same time as the show did. So they don't necessarily have same story correlations, and maybe there's some stuff different there. I don't know. I haven't checked out the manga. But yeah,
I don't think that'd be the first time that it happens.
No, definitely not. But it's the rarer thing of the two. Usually you get a TV anime based on the manga as the source material, and this is kind of like, well, we got the same story set up for both these things, but one isn't really based on the other. So
Right.
yeah, and yeah, the manga is still running while the show is all wrapped up, at least for now. I haven't heard anything of it getting a sequel, and the story ends at a pretty natural point, so doesn't really need a sequel. So I doubt we'll get one. So I wonder if manga's still running and everything, if it will go into different places and maybe end a different way. We'll see. I might check out once it's over if the ending differentiates itself from the series in any way, because that would be interesting. So I have neither read nor watched Ashita no Joe, but from what I can garner, the commonalities are between this and Megalobox are not that big, at least not in terms of story. There are some plot beats that are kind of similar, but the setup and motivation for the characters seem to be quite different. So even if you have watched or read the old stuff, this offers basically a completely different story, at least from what I can tell. Like I said, I haven't read the source material or watched it, so maybe there is some more common ground to be found here. But yeah, so far I couldn't make out that much. But the creators of the show like to play around with the connection to the old story a bit, because that story ended in a very iconic way. I mean, I've heard of that before, even though I haven't read the series, but that has made its round even for people who, only ever heard the name Ashita no Joe once. But yeah, it ends on a very iconic way. And from the very, very beginning, Megalobox does these ending stingers at the end of each episode that hint at the story maybe ending up in a very similar place as Ashita no Joe did. Yeah. So I won't say more about that because that would be spoilers, but even though, the original manga is from the fucking 60s and 70s, I think there's an expiration date on that, but still, a lot of people maybe haven't heard of that show, so I don't want to give too much away. But you will see what I mean when you lay your eyes on the ending stingers for the first time, I think. Now, let's talk style. Because if there's something that Megalobox has in spades, it's style. From the background art over the character designs to the music, the show looks and sounds amazing. Apparently TMS did this weird thing where they downscaled their raw footage and upscaled it again to give the show this rough and hand-drawn look, which makes it, kind of look like this, maybe 90s late cell, early digital show that just feels old school in a really good way, especially if you started getting into anime in that kind of time frame. And yeah, that's why that show felt really familiar in certain parts in a really good way. The combination of the dirty, rough art and the musical choices gave me some Cowboy Bebop or Samurai Champloo vibes. Yeah, and just in terms of look, I cannot complain about the show at all. I love its style. I don't know, have you seen any art from it, John?
I've seen a little bit of art and I've watched a few clips of it, and I had heard about the whole basically messing around with the quality of the video to give it that old vibe, and I think that's genius because it really it cements the aesthetic that they're trying to go for, and I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool choice, and I hope. I mean, some people probably won't like it because it looks, sometimes maybe a bit too rough, sometimes maybe a bit too soft, in certain parts, and maybe a bit washed out. I wouldn't even describe it as that because that's just a certain kind of style, and it doesn't feel like it's downgrading the visuals or anything. It's just a different style, and it happens to be one that I like a lot.
Makes me wonder if on the Blu-rays or something they'll have an alternate video track where you can watch the clean version.
I wonder if that is possible. Yeah, that would be cool. But yeah, just in general, I hope some more shows do that thing. I mean, it wouldn't work for any kind of subject matter, I think, but just this kind of grungy underdog story with a kind of criminal ghetto feel to it, just like Banana Fish. That would have worked on that show as well, I think. I mean, Banana Fish also kind of goes there, but not as much. It still feels very clean in terms of art direction.
Definitely not nearly as aggressive.
Like I said, the style in Megalobox is fantastic, and I love it to bits. But There's always a but. There always is a big hairy but around the corner.
Oh no.
Sadly, the show also teaches us a very important lesson. Great style alone doesn't cut it. Because in this show about boxing, with a lot of people who box and are boxers, the actual boxing looks pretty shit. Most of the fights feel incredibly weightless and boring. The animation is slow and feels sluggish. Almost none of the moves feel like they have any significant impact. There are no interesting camera perspectives and signature moves. I have not seen any other boxing anime besides this and Hajime no Ippo. But the difference between those two in terms of action direction, choreography, and animation is like night and day. I love Hajime no Ippo, and I think it had some of the coolest moments in sports anime put on screen. None of the fights in Megalobox ever got me excited. Quite the opposite, actually. Not even the emotionally important moments are staged in an exciting way during the fight. You know, which is one of the best things about sports anime, in my opinion. When an emotional turning point for the character happens during a match and is realized by the character turning the match around in his favor, as well with a surprising move or demonstration of will, and that combined with a really well animated scene, shit like that can make me jump up from my couch and yell at the screen. And Ippo managed to do that at least once, if not several times. And Megalobox could not. Felt like it didn't even try to. And that was disappointing. That was really disappointing to me. I was looking forward to some key, like really riveting emotional fights and moments in that show, and I didn't get those from an animation standpoint alone. But I will elaborate on that. Maybe I went into it with the wrong expectations. I thought this would turn out to be like this crazy superpowered brawl, considering the fighters wear these cyborg parts on their body. And in the case of Yuri, even like the exoskeleton is even fused with their body subdermally, because it's kind of like this nanomachine thing, nanomachine son. But yeah, and even when Joe discards his gear and becomes gearless Joe, like this underdog fighter who is the only one who fights without gear pretty early on, I still like hope for some insane fights later on. Like in the very beginning, I thought like, oh, okay, maybe they're saving some of their budgets and the crazy fights will happen later on and the final fight against Yuri in the end will be amazing. No. No, that just doesn't happen. I think the show was more interested in like this slow, methodical, maybe quote-unquote realistic approach to boxing, which I personally just don't care about in anime. This is not what I'm watching sports anime for. I want crazy, over-the-top bullshit, at least animation-wise. I mean, sure, I have watched some shows that are, outliers in that regard, like Giant Killing, for example, which also went for a more realistic tone. But even that had more inspired animation and animated matches than Megalobox. And that is a show about soccer, not a sport where people beat the shit out of each other. So, I don't know, I would have expected more impact and more fierceness and more, raw emotion from this show than I, got in the end. So yeah, none of the matches worked for me from a direction and animation standpoint. So the reason why I still like this show overall, which I do, are the characters. Joe, for example, he can have a bit of a dickish attitude, but he is overall a nice guy and cares about the people in his life. And that makes him a cool, relatable main character. And we got a bunch of interesting side characters too. Yuri is cool, and his relationship with Joe and their final confrontation are built up very well on an emotional level. I wish, the actual confrontation looked more interesting, but what can you do? Yukiko and her brother are interesting and have interesting dynamic as well. And we get like the small gang of street kids who basically join, Joe in his training and everything and become part of his team. And they bring a lot of fun to the show and lightheartedness. But the best and most interesting character, in my opinion, is Joe's coach, Nanbu, who starts out basically just using Joe's talent to pay off his debts with an underworld boss called Fujimaki. And he comes across as like a petty gambler and a sniveling coward. But you soon learn that there is a lot more to him, and his relationship with Joe changes several times over the course of the show. And I think he's really awesome. He's an awesome character and the most interesting and emotionally engaging part of the show. Like the most interesting moments, character moments in the show are related to him in a way. And I really like that character and the way the show handled him. And it was worth watching the show for, his relationship with Joe developing alone. Like see those two grow and bounce off each other. But I like pretty much the entire cast, and it shows you how important good character writing is, because if I didn't find the characters so sympathetic and relatable, I would probably not have stuck with the show until the end. I mean, the style is cool, but the fights were so boring to me that I always wanted them to be over as quick as possible after a while, only to get to the actual character moments, build up, and exploration between the fights, which I didn't expect. I expected to go into the show and be like, okay, the character stuff is neat, but yeah, let's get into the action. And it turned out to be the complete opposite, because every time the match was coming up, like after half of the show, when I lost all my hope, I was like, oh no, let's get this over with. So luckily the fights don't go too long. Like there's only one fight that goes over 2 episodes, I think. While the big emotional moments of the show that happen during the fights are not highlighted well at all in regards to the animation, most of them still work because I got attached to the characters and wanted to see them succeed and grow and not die. So yeah, that's why I stuck with the show, and I ended up still liking it a lot. So yeah, I think I will already wrap things up here. I think this series is worth watching just because of the characters and the style. The plot itself is not super surprising. It's a sports anime at heart. Them are simple stories, but there are some twists and turns and emotionally rewarding developments in the series, which I think is reason enough to check it out. It's a short show. It's only 12 episodes. Just don't go into Megalobox thinking that you will get crazy, amazing fights, because there are none. Come for the style, endure the matches, stay for the characters, and you will probably still have a good experience with the show.
Right, so next up is Caligula, a show that left me feeling kind of lukewarm, but we'll get to that. So what is Caligula about? Mew is a virtual idol. Idols.
Here we go again.
Basically think of Mew kind of like Hatsune Miku, but much more evil, kind of, sort of, unintentionally evil, I guess you could say. Mew is a virtual idol who performs user-inputted songs and gains self-awareness through exposure to users' bitter feelings and dissatisfaction toward reality. So if your Vocaloid got mad at what the lyrics you're throwing at it, you gonna get got.
I imagine, just angsty teens throwing like, kill me, I wanna die, like at her, and she's singing there. It's like, what the fuck am I singing?
Basically.
This sucks.
But yes, wanting to save humanity, which she believes is continuously suffering. She lures people into a virtual reality world called Mobius with her songs. She then imprisons them there, thinking that they will be free from the suffering of reality and that all their wishes will come true. And 9 members of what is dubbed the Going Home Club form this group that want to escape from Mobius and try to, go home, to try and find a way out. Like we said back in the sneak peek premise, that was very poorly introduced in the first episode, and you would probably only know if you had read a summary or played the game that this show is based on. And I haven't played the game, but I'm going to throw out there that's probably the better alternative to watching this show, because this show's kind of a mess.
It sure felt like it. And what you said about not the first episode not being super clear, I think you read a summary of Caligula, when we talked about the show in the sneak peek, and I was like, what the fuck? I didn't get any of that from from this first episode. It's so ridiculous. Okay.
Yeah, this show just, I don't know how to concretely describe everything that's wrong with it. So we start off with the first episode, like not knowing what's going on.
Which is not
And
inherently a bad thing. Like, there are shows that can build up a decent amount of mystery. You want to know what's happening, and, if there's
yeah,
issues.
but okay, let's compare this to, this might not be a fair comparison, but let's compare this to something like, I don't know, Attack on Titan, a show that as soon as it answers questions, gives you more to chew on.
Mm-hmm.
But it does that, in a very interesting and very, well-paced manner. This does not. This most definitely does not, because none of the characters are interesting. The animation is kind of it's not Satellite's best showing. I love Satellite to death, and we've talked about them before when we talked about Macross Delta and Symphogear and in other shows.
They can be a bit spotty at times, though.
They can, which is unfortunate because I love the work that they do. But this was, I imagine that the people at Furyu who developed the game were like, hey, we want to make this into a show. Who'll do it for the lowest dollar amount, which has definitely happened before. It's so hard to just, for me to not just rate this show off, because in the 11th hour, maybe I'm skipping ahead way too much in when I'm talking about the show, but in the 11th hour, it kind of writes itself off.
Okay.
Do you remember how when we were talking about in Kokoku, how the main conflict could have been resolved just by like being, well, why don't we just let you do that thing?
Yeah.
This sort of does the same thing, where it's like, oh, you mean this could have been resolved without having to go to Mobius? What really did it for me was, number one, like I said earlier, the characters are not interesting. And then when you get to a point where the main character, Ritsu, shows that he's not quite what he is, and he ends up being something else entirely, and it's sort of like weird and very tonally dissonant, I think is a good way to describe it.
Okay. It sounds like there's no good payoff for any of the mysteries the show is like setting up in its first episode.
No, there isn't.
And I mean, the thing about Coco, what was problematic about the resolution in Coco was like that it robs the conflict of any tension. I mean, after the fact, but still, it feels like it makes you think, okay, this amounted to a lot of nothing, or a lot of unnecessary things, and that feels wholly unsatisfying in certain regards. I mean, we still like parts of Kokoku, but that didn't work, and it sounds like Caligula, made the same mistake in certain parts.
Yeah, because there's like these characters who are, they call themselves the composers, and they sort of are in service of Mew, kind of, but not really. And they call the kids who are in the Going Home Club, the rogues. They're trying to destroy Mobius, which, yes, they are. But the conflict between the Going Home Club and the composers is like wholly unnecessary.
Okay.
Like every time they start fighting, it's like when we find out, the big quote unquote plot revelation at the end of the show, it's like they didn't need to do anything at all. Okay, all right.
I mean, if you like set that up correctly, it can be nice to say, okay, this is kind of a tragedy that these factions had to clash, and while they have actually more common ground than they thought, or something like that, or this conflict was unnecessary and led to so much hardship nonetheless. But if the reason for that conflict is still super convoluted or dumb and should have been like seen through by all of the parties and characters involved, that is the problem. Like, if you think, okay, there should have been at least one character in this who said, hold, everybody shut the fuck up. This is how we solve this without killing everybody or something like that. That's a problematic.
Nope, doesn't happen. The composers are basically like, we want to stay in our perfect VR world, and the Go Home Club is like, no, come on, guys, that's dumb. Don't do that thing.
And there's no good reasoning behind them actually wanting to stay in the VR world, or are they giving? Okay,
not really, no, because it's Hatsune Miku saying everyone's suffering. I'm going to save you by throwing you in the computer, and that's obviously not the solution.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you get some if the show, which I don't know if it did, I assume not, would have given you like some interesting character backgrounds for the villains, and it's like, hey, okay, these people have suffered, and there's some good reason for why they want to stay in this fantasy world, because outside is too rough, and if it makes them relatable. But if they're just being assholes for the sake of it, and it was like, I want to outlive my power fantasy or stuff like that. That's, and that's what it felt like. I've only watched until the 3rd episode, but there's, already one of the main antagonists in there, and it's like, okay, this is what his or her thing was. That's kind of disappointing.
Yeah. So the main characters only have marginally better motivations than the composers, and it's like, I watched that show beginning to end, and I was like, I didn't care about anyone or anything, which makes me wonder if the game executes better on its concepts than the show did. Certainly, I'm not gonna, shell out $40 to $60 to play it, but hey, the Caligula effect, now available on your PlayStation Vita and available next year for PlayStation 4. Hashtag not an ad, hashtag could be an ad.
I was about to say, man, we're not getting paid for this. Don't advertise a possibly shitty game.
But
so far it doesn't get the quality seal of Anime Brand Freeze quality seal of approval.
No, like
that.
I feel like this isn't the worst show on Earth, but you could do way better. You could do way better.
I have to ask you though, John, because you stuck with it until the end. Was it just like a morbid curiosity, and what did you at one point, I just need to know how this stupid thing ends, or was there something that you could cling to where you were like, okay, this is at least decent?
When they tried to shroud Ritsu in mystery towards like the end of the 2nd act, I was like, I wonder what they're going to do with this. And then they revealed it, and I was like, oh, this was fucking dumb.
Oh, that's a shame. I'm glad I jumped ship then.
I mean, what can I say good about the show? The music was good. It had like 5 it had 5 composers on it. One of them who actually worked on the original game, which is good. Tsukasa Masuko, who apparently also worked on a lot of old Mega 10 stuff like Megami Tensei 1 and 2, Devil Summoner.
Oh, neat.
Worked on Sword of Mana and Death Smiles. So
cool.
There was another composer, Yasuharu Takanashi, who worked on stuff like Boruto, Naruto, Carnival Phantasm, Fairy Tail, the new Gegege no Kitaro, a whole load of Precure, like almost all of Precure, Ikitosen, and Log Horizon. And then a lot of the other composers aren't as big.
Is he also the guy who worked on Killing Bites? I'm not sure if that's the same guy, but I know the same composer who worked on Naruto Shippuden worked on Killing Bites. I don't know if that's the guy, because I'm bad with names, people. I'm sorry.
Hold on. I'm going to fact check myself in real time here. Yes, he did work on Killing Bites.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
There we go.
I don't know why I didn't.
It's that guy.
I don't know why I left that off the list.
It's a trashy show that only I love. Maybe, I don't know.
But yeah.
I love his style. So
Takanashi has worked on a lot of big name stuff. He's done a lot of good work. So it stands to reason that the music in this show is really good.
So would you say it's the best thing about the show?
Yes, I would. Which is a shame, because the person who worked on the script, Toko Machida, has worked on, some alright stuff like The Devil is a Part-Timer. I thought was, a really fun show.
Yeah, me too.
Worked on Samurai Champloo, Space Brothers, which is apparently a very well-loved show. The Idol Master. It's some questionable stuff like the heroic legend of Arslan and Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal too, but that's fine. We all have to make a paycheck. And the show was directed by Junichi Wada, who's worked on stuff like The Disappearance of Yuki Nagato, which I thought was fine, but a lot of people have, including a mutual friend of ours, don't quite seem to understand who the best girl in Haruhi is, and that's fine. But yes, he's also directed, I believe you watched World End, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so he worked on that as well.
Mixed bag.
Yeah. He was an episode director for Eureka 7 AO, Fairy Tail, Hero Man, and Log Horizon. So this show's pedigree isn't as strong as it could be, but you could still make something good with the crew you got. But oh man, you know what? The issue might have been that they tried to cram this down into 12 episodes, and I wonder if that's why a lot of the characterization felt very, okay, you know who this character is? Let's go to the next plot point. Wait, no, hold on. No, we really don't. But, that's what you get when you try to compress a 40, 50, 60, 70, I don't even know how many hours long Caligula actually is the game. When you try to do that sort of thing,
it's always I mean, video game adaptations in general are tough to do, and I haven't seen don't think I've seen a really supremely good one in anime form yet. But
I mean, I hear Steins Gate was really, really good.
Yeah,
but,
okay. I haven't seen that. Yeah, but it's especially in RPGs, there is a lot of character development that happens, in the off action parts, and there are a lot of there's a lot of text and a lot of conversations, and like trimming that down so that it works in anime form is not an easy task. And 12 episodes for an RPG adaptation sounds way too few episodes.
Yeah, I mean, Persona 4, the animation made an attempt at that, and it did all right, but the thing about the Persona games is a lot of the character growth and development is actually not in the main storyline. You have to go to the social link quests.
Yeah,
and
it's the same for Persona 5, and that's...
Yeah, those are arguably... I played through Persona 4. God, it took me 100 hours to do so, but I thought the game itself was, all right. But the social link parts, those were fantastic. Mm-hmm. Which, made me wish those were more, considering they are essentially completely optional, made me wish they were more integrated into the main story. And maybe that's the case here. I don't know. I'm not going to go out and buy this game to find out, but it doesn't the show was not worth watching because it was nonsensical and just very, very spotty on the animation side, which is weird of me to say because they have a lot of the same complaints about the next show we're going to talk about, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, speaking of that, let's escape this horrible matrix of mediocrity and get to a show that I think both of us at least enjoyed.
Yes, definitely.
Saichi Sugimoto is a young soldier who made a name for himself as the immortal Sugimoto in the Russo-Japanese War in the early 20th century. Since the war has ended, he gets by being a miner and trying to support the wife of his best friend who died in the war. One day, an old man tells him an intriguing story about a mountain of gold that was stolen from a tribe of Ainu, the indigenous people of Japan. And after being caught and thrown into prison, the leader of the thieves decided to draw a map of the hidden location of the gold on 24 of his fellow inmates. To find the location of the treasure, you would need to combine the tattoos of all the different prisoners who escaped and are currently at large. Sugimoto, first very skeptical of this tale, soon has reason to believe it to be true and decides to hunt for the prisoners and the gold. When his quest leads him directly into the jaws of an angry giant bear, he gets saved by an Ainu girl called Serpa, who, as it turns out, also has a relation to the hidden gold, because it was stolen from her village and her father got murdered in the process. Serpa and Sugimoto form a partnership to hunt for the gold. Sugimoto wants to properly support his dead friend's wife and pay for her eye surgery, and Serpa wants to find her father's killers and bring them to justice. But this journey won't be an easy one, because in their way stands Mother Nature, a bunch of crazy killers, and two opposing factions that have their own grand motives and will stop at nothing to get their hands on the hidden treasure. So, yeah, Golden Kamuy, pretty cool setup, and this show is based on a manga by Satoru Noda. It started in 2014 and is still running, and is his only work so far, from what I could gather. And the animation is done by Geno Studio.
I think it's Geno Studio because they sharded off from another studio, and their first work was a movie called Genocidal Organ, and that's where they got the name.
Makes sense. So yeah, that name might ring familiar if you have listened to our review of a show we've already mentioned on this episode, Kokoku. A decent show with a lot of janky art and animation. And the jank train keeps on chugging along in Golden Kamuy, because boy oh boy does this show look rough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the basic art direction itself is pretty good. Like, we got a lot of nice scenery, because this is a very, like, nature-heavy show in more ways than one. And we also got a lot of cool and unique character designs. But, you know, most of that came from the manga. And, man, the animation in this series looks really wonky through most of the show's runtime.
Yeah, it does. It looks bad, but you know what? I loved this show. It was great.
I mean, you know, just staying on the animation for a few more seconds here. There are some better looking episodes, but they never reach a level where I'd say, yeah, this looks good, like, or really good. Lots of off-model faces and characters, weird stiff limb movement, lots of shortcuts. There are several CG bears who look really bad.
And a CG wolf, don't forget.
Yeah, Rita the giant white wolf. Thankfully, he's not CG all the time. And that's good. Like, when he is, he looks like shit, but when he's not, he looks actually decent. But the whole show feels really low budget. And just from an action direction standpoint alone, the bad animation ruins the impact of some of the otherwise cool fight scenes, simply because it looks unintentionally funny. I say unintentionally because the show has a lot of intentionally funny moments in it. And that's maybe because the bad animation doesn't weigh the show down as much as it could have if, you know, it would have been a completely serious dark story. But nope, this show is wacky as hell. A shitload of crazy over-the-top characters, a lot of poop and dick jokes, people being drunk idiots, a lot of weird faces, slapstick humor. This show is a hoot, which I didn't expect going into it. I don't know if you did, but I was kind of caught off guard of how funny and wacky the show got.
I mean, they kept playing it up as being like, you know, oh, this is going to be the show of the season. You know, everyone loves the manga. Watch the show. And I was like, the show's goofy and I fucking love it.
Yeah, I expected like this big serious shown action like in you know, early 20th century Japan and war story and everything. And then what I got was JoJo's vibes, which in my book is always a good thing, just, you know, to make that clear. But like this combination of wacky humor and like downright ridiculous level of gory violence, yeah, that definitely gave me JoJo vibes.
I will say I had an equal amount of moments where I was laughing my face off to moments where I was like, oh shit, though.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's up and down in the show, like high spikes of fun and oh, holy shit moments. And yeah, but the comedy in the show is gold, you know, as this name implies. I guess it's a reference to. I mean, Golden Kamuy means basically golden god, I think, but they, you know, could also call it golden jokes. I don't know. It's good stuff. Like the scene with Rita lusting after the horse meat, and pretty much all of the scenes with Ushiyama killed me. Like, great stuff. But yeah, the setting is also pretty interesting as well. I don't think the Russo-Japanese War has really been tackled that much in anime before. At least I haven't come across it until now.
Not really, no. I mean,
No.
I can't. It'd be hard pressed to think of another manga or anime set in this time period.
I mean, we've seen a lot of like Sengoku stuff before and a lot of Second World War stuff, but this and the other show that's airing this season with the Mongol invasion, not really. So yeah, this is a pretty interesting time frame that we were getting here. And to be fair, it only serves like as a setup for some of the characters and their background stories. It's not like this is not during the war, this is after the war. It sets the tone and and the place of the time that the story takes place in. And yeah, like I said, serves as a setup for some of the characters and the background stories and the stuff with the gold and everything, because there was a gold rush during that time in Japan. But it's cool, literally, because so far it's all set in winter, which is refreshing watching that right now. And the war setup brings also some interesting character dynamics with it. Like a lot of the enemies in the show are experienced Japanese soldiers, for example, which is pretty interesting. You don't just get thugs, but you get like pretty intimidating, like experienced veterans, war veterans. And that's like, okay, this is cool. And Sugimoto also, like, as a character, definitely grapples with the fallout of his war experience. I would say he has at least clear signs of PTSD. He is, he's very afraid of dying. He's so afraid of dying that he fights like a devil to stay alive, and he has nightmares of his fallen comrades and everything, which is staged really well once, when it happens in the show. And Sirpa actually has to rein him in several times, because for him, every confrontation comes down to kill or be killed. And yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting character setup. And at the same time, Sirpa and Sugimoto are very sympathetic, awesome, and capable characters with a good dynamic. I love pretty much every scene with them, those two together, because they work really well and they like each other, and it's just cool. Like all the dialogue between those two is fun and engaging, and you get a feeling for those characters. Like, man, I like these two. I like these two working together, and their ideas and their goals and everything, and it's cool stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think the group dynamics of each set of characters were really great, and they all played off of each other really well. Like that was one of the strengths of the show, is that it had really well written characters. It was just pretty well written in general, and that's really what kept me going all throughout.
Oh, definitely. Sirpa, for example, knows a lot about nature, so we learned a lot about nature because the show is very intent on telling us about it, and food.
And, and a lot about the Ainu people as well, which was some interesting stuff.
Exactly, yeah, that's super cool. A lot about their food too. Like, lots of different dishes are highlighted in this show, and despite its janky animation, the show actually manages to make it look very tasty. So, just like with Food Wars, don't watch this on an empty stomach. You're on a diet. That's a bad idea and a bad time. Like you mentioned before, I also like that the story features an Ainu as a main character, which I haven't really seen done either in anime so far. At least I don't think I have seen a show that did it. And we learn a lot about their history and their story and their beliefs and religion and everything, and how they live, what they do and stuff like that. And they even address the discrimination against the Ainu a bit, which I didn't expect, but commend the show for doing so. Even if it's only in a very few scenes, but at least it's there. Like the show doesn't completely block it out. And we can't forget about the bad guys in this show. They're fantastic. Most of them are super wacky and over the top, but almost all of them are like these legit badasses. Some almost reaching Terminator levels of being unstoppable. But they're all very entertaining. And on some levels, their motives are kind of noble as well, I guess. At least Tsurumi, who's like the leader of this division of soldiers from the war, who want to get their goals for their own reasons. I think even though he is probably the craziest and creepiest of them all, he has a pretty solid reason to wanting to get his hands on the gold, which makes him for all the creepiness surprisingly sympathetic. I didn't expect it. I mean, his methods are not acceptable as all. but it's like, oh, I can see where this guy is coming from and why he's doing what he's doing. And that's always cool, like giving your enemies and your antagonists some depth. And I think the show definitely does that, because on the other side of the main factions, you have Achikata, who is this remnant of the Shinsengumi, and is like the most badass old guy since Joseph Joestar, probably. Like,
also, to put on my history hat for a second, probably not historically accurate that he'd be alive at this time, but that's fine, whatever.
They play around with that, and it's like, yeah, maybe I think he has maybe eaten a mermaid or something, and
that's right.
Yeah, and they of course they play around with that, but I just in terms of how accurate this show is in terms of what happened during that time frame, I think there are a lot of loose interpretations of some of the things. I don't know how much research they did and how much of that stuff like rings true, and if there's some inspiration of real characters in there. I would assume so, but for the most part, you should just use the setup of the people in there, like the disclaimer that JoJo always likes to give in the ending. What is it like? Commonalities with real people is just pure coincidence, and stuff like that. Like that's probably the same for this show. But yeah, I like all of them. I think the villains are great in this, and even though a lot of them are only like in there for 1 or 2 episodes, there's still entertaining stories and cool and weird stuff, and most of them like exit the show in a very memorable way, and that's also pretty cool. I think another highlight character is, like I mentioned before, Ushiyama, who is just amazing. The dick professor reigns supreme.
Yeah, goddamn.
And yeah,
fucking giant ass tank of a man. Yes. Dicks. And not only the villains are great, a lot of the other side characters are cool as well. Shiraishi is a lot of fun, the escape artist, or Scat Master. What does a Serper call him? Scat God, and he is called the Escape God or something. I think so. Yeah.
He's super fun. He's like the super goof off character and comedic relief. Pretty much every character in the show is a comedic relief character, but he even more so. And Tanigaki is cool, one of the soldiers. And Nihei, the hunter, he's also great. The cast in this is like just super varied and entertaining, and we also got a big who is who of voice actors giving their all to turn those characters into something special.
Definitely. The guy who plays Saichi, I feel like it's worth highlighting him first, is Chikahiro Kobayashi, and this is like his first big like starring role. He's had other like smaller like this person, male student, like those sorts of roles, but this is like his first big role, and he pretty much nailed it as Sugimoto. He was great. But yeah, a lot of the other characters, like we got Akio Otsuka as Nihei, who you probably know as Solid Snake. We got Hochu Otsuka as Tsurumi, who is Jiraiya in Naruto. Our friend Toshizo Hijikata is everyone's favorite Joji Nakata. Good old Kirei Kotomine in the Fate series, forever and ever. Mm-hmm. Kenjiro Suda has a role in there. Probably know him better as Kaiba in Yu-Gi-Oh! Tomokazu Sugita is the Nikaido twins, actually, who I completely forgot, actually. Mm-hmm. And Tanigaki is played by Yoshimasa Hosoya, who we just talked about Megalobox. He was Junk Dog in that, and he's been in a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So yeah, this cast reaches very far and wide for how probably budget this production was, as you said earlier.
Yeah, good stuff, definitely. And everyone, like I said, is giving it their all, and to bring these crazy larger than life characters to life. And yeah, it's good stuff. It's really entertaining. You can feel that the people who worked on this had fun voicing this show and doing this show. Like it seeps from not the pages but the screen. So yeah, definitely good stuff. And the music is cool too. It's done by Kenichiro Suihiro, who, among other things, also did the music for Space Patrol Ludoko. And one of my personal favorites from the previous season's Girls' Last Tour, which also had a stellar soundtrack. So yeah, this show also shines in that regard. I haven't really said anything about the story yet. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, you get like this, basically, like I said, 1-2 setup, episode setup. Wouldn't really call it monster of the week, but you know, you could kind of go there like, oh, here's the next one with the tattoo on his back, and we probably have to fight him, maybe kill him and get the tattoo, and then move on to the next. And you know, that happens in several episodes, but we also have some larger overarching plot with the two factions that, you know, try to play their own game, and you know, some of that. And those are not as clear-cut and steady as you might think, which leads to some neat shifts in character relations. And there's kind of a big twist later in the show, but we haven't gotten a payoff for that yet. I think that's coming in the second season. I mean, that's where the characters basically are heading right now. So we'll see if that amounts to something interesting in the end. We don't really know yet. Sometimes the show likes to meander a bit too much in its exploration of, you know, nature and Ainu and, you know, Japanese cuisine, which, you know, is not a bad thing. And I generally appreciate it going there, especially when it comes to teaching us about the culture of the Ainu. But at certain moments in the show, I would have liked for the plot to move along a bit faster, especially if there was like a good build-up in the previous episode, and then in the next episode, they, you know, first like do other stuff first half of the next episode. It's like, you gave me like this kind of cliffhanger here, and I wanted to see that finished up. And I mean,
yeah,
you know, that happens sometimes. And another thing is like, this season kind of just ends. You feel like, okay, this is really split up into two cores, and it would have liked to continue immediately. There is no real cliffhanger or big build up for what's to come in season 2. I mean, there's some, and I definitely want to see what happens once the characters reach their, you know, current destination. But it doesn't end on like a, oh my god, what the fuck, give me season 2 now or I'll die moment, or you know, or something that feels like a proper chapter conclusion. It just kind of stops.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it lame or disappointing, but it's like, okay, I wish the show would have ended like, or this season would have ended like on a stronger note, instead of just saying, okay, catch you in a few months on the continuation of this. But yeah, none of that stopped me from enjoying this series so far, which I did a lot. And I think, John, for you, it was only like this small nitpick as well.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I went into this show, I try to go into every show with, you know, whatever expectations, not even knowing what I'm going to be getting into. But I really, in spite of this show's foibles, enjoyed it a lot. On the note of you saying it meandering, I always like to, I don't know if this is a fair comparison to any other piece of media, but I always think of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and all those books written by Tolkien. At least it's not meandering like he does, because bless Tolkien's heart for the universe he created, but I fell asleep so many times reading just The Hobbit. This at least kept me going.
He likes to get into the world building a lot.
Well, you see that stick off the side of the footpath. It has a very story. Get back to the plot, please.
And I mean, that's what the movies are for. Like, I mean, they streamline that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, not really in The Hobbit, because that kind of, you know, turned it into something
worse. Why did it have to be 3 movies?
I don't know. Because the studio wanted money.
Yeah, thanks, Peter Jackson. But yeah, no, this Golden Kamuy, if you can put aside the animation, which is tough, I get it, I understand. It's a fun show. It's really good. It's well written, and when they announced season 2, you know, like, I think I had the same reaction as you when I got to the end. It was like, oh, okay, sure. But then when we announced season 2, I was like, yeah, not like, yes, I'm so pumped, but like, yeah, I can't wait for more of these stupid shenanigans.
Yeah, exactly. And and maybe that's enough, right? I mean, we had a good time, and sure, it could have been like, I don't know, Attack on Titan levels of cliffhanger or something like that, or My Hero Academia, but you don't really need it if, the foundation of the show is so solid, especially from a character writing standpoint, and, a lot of good joke material and everything. So it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna get more of this, and that's amazing. And it doesn't necessarily need to, immediately go like to the full extent of, to the logical conclusion of the story, which I think it also won't do because the manga is still running. So we won't probably get a proper conclusion at the end of the second season either, unless the show, is going to differ from the source material. It's going to do its own ending, which I hope it won't do. I hope it will just, continue on, then maybe take a bit of a longer break, and then we'll get the rest of the story once the manga has wrapped up. Just like John, I recommend you check it out if you can deal with huge amounts of blood and really wonky animation in favor of great characters and wacky humor. And despite its shortcomings, I had a lot of fun with the show, and I'm really looking forward to the next season. The dick lecture is over. And that is a wrap on the 55th episode of Anime Brain Freeze. All the music in our show is from the Double Dragon Neon soundtrack by the amazing Jack Kaufman. Please go to vit.bandcamp.com and check out his awesome work. Our show is available on most of the popular podcast servers, now on Spotify as well, but it's always worth visiting animebrainfreeze.com for some interesting articles linked in our episode release posts. Follow us on Twitter at AnyBrainFreeze. We tweet regular updates and fun anime-related stuff there. Leave us comments and questions on Facebook and our YouTube channel, or send an email to animebrainfreeze@gmail.com. We would love to read your feedback. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you had a good time, and please join us again on our next show. Macht's gut.
So long, everybody. Next time on Anime Brain Freeze.
A legendary war among the stars.
A workplace romance for a couple of nerds.
And the return of a Full Metal favorite.